I know y'all been studying the Psalms, and I was intending to pick up in that chapter, but I thought I would carry on in what I've been teaching the teenagers, and it's the same material that we covered a few years ago in the young adults. So, like I was telling Miss Sue, it's the Word of God is not something that is complicated. So it should be able to be understood by all ages in all classes. We've been studying in the teenage class the book of Acts. It's a wonderful book. What's the overall purpose of the book of Acts? Can anybody tell me? The overall purpose of the book of Acts? It gives us a history of what? The church. History of the church. That's why it's such a wonderful book. It's a book that if you were to try to teach someone the gospel, could you think of any other book to go to that would give you what you need in the book of Acts? I would say no. It's the only book that you really need to go to. I heard one preacher say one time in a debate to a denominational preacher, denominational preacher was going to all these letters that Paul had written to these churches and trying to justify how a person is saved without baptism. The preacher said, "You're reading mail that's not yours. Those letters aren't intended for you. Those letters are intended for Christians," which helps people understand better what Paul was writing to those Christians about who had already been saved by the blood of Christ through baptism, what they need to continue to do. And so if we want to teach someone the gospel, they need to read the book of Acts. They need to read the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they need to read the book of Acts. So what we've been trying to do in the teenage class, we did it years ago in the young adult class across the hall, is we try to memorize at least one thing out of each chapter of the book of Acts. And so in the book that we've been using, it gives us these little mnemonic pictures with each chapter to help us try to remember at least one thing in the book of Acts. I took those and it gives you on the pictures, it usually gives you a space to write out. I try to combine it all on one page. That's why they're all jumbled up there next to each other. But you can still probably write in there what each chapter means. Real quick, can anybody identify any chapter on that picture here? Any chapter at all. It doesn't have to be in order. Is there one you're like, oh, I know what that one is? Anybody want to take a stab at one at all? 8. All right, we have baptism. That's a great picture. Gives you a good illustration. Does anybody know who was baptized in Acts chapter 8? Specifically, it is a baptism. The Ethiopian eunuch, right? Acts chapter 8 is the Ethiopian eunuch. Well, I hope that y'all know at least Acts chapter 2. What is Acts chapter 2? The day of Pentecost, the establishment of the church, right? You see that 2 there? It's got a 2 that's pointing to a church building. Acts chapter 2, the establishment of the church. Well, Acts chapter 1, you've got the 1 pointing up through a cloud. The ascension of Jesus, right? The ascension of Jesus. That's very good. You also have, if you want to indicate that 1, they selected 1 apostle, didn't they? In Acts chapter 1. Judas had committed suicide. He was no longer part of the 12. They had to appoint the replacement, and they picked Matthias. Acts chapter 3. Anybody know what Acts chapter 3 happens there? Looks like that number 3 is upside down, and one of the legs is a cane. It's a lame person, right? Who was healed? Or Peter and John healed a lame man, right? And after they healed that lame man in Acts chapter 4, they're put on trial. So you have a person sitting there on a floor, a chair. He is on a bench. He is awaiting trial. Peter and John are. Acts chapter 5, you've got a guillotine. What was a guillotine used for? Execution, right? Two people were executed in Acts chapter 5 by God. Who were they? Ananias and Sapphira. Ananias and Sapphira were executed by God for lying to God, right? Acts chapter 6, it's got a 6 turning to a 7. In Acts chapter 6, there were 7 something selected. 7 deacons were selected to oversee the work of what? The widows, right? All right, Acts chapter 6, 7 men were selected. One of those men's name was Stephen, right? And then you get to Acts chapter 7, and that S got cut off there on the printer, but that's an S in front of it, and it's got Stephen. Stephen spells his name different in Scripture, but for the sake of remembering the chapter, Acts chapter 7, you add a T to 7, and you got Stephen, right? And then what happens to Stephen in Acts chapter 7? Or Acts chapter 8, 7 going into 8? He's stoned, right? And then Acts chapter 8, you have the Ethiopian eunuch, as Bobby pointed out. Acts chapter 9, you've got that 9 that's reversed around. It looks like a P. Who is in Acts chapter 9 that has a P in their name? Paul, right? He's called Saul, but we know him more commonly as Paul. Acts chapter 10, if you're not familiar with that, you've got that 1 and that 0 that's put together and it looks like an ear of cornstalk. Cornelius, right? Acts chapter 10, Cornelius. You see how it works out there? Acts chapter 11, the 1 is looking in a mirror to make the 11. What happens in Acts chapter 11 that is a reflection of something that's already previously happened? Peter goes, he has to go to the Sanhedrin before the council, and he explains to the Christians at Jerusalem that he had done what in Acts chapter 10? Well, he goes to I misspoke. He goes to the Jerusalem council, right? And he tells them what? What had he done in Acts chapter 10? Exactly. It's a reflection or a repeating of what he done in Acts chapter 10. He tells the Christian Jews that the gospel has been taken to the Gentiles. Cornelius. He retells. So that's why it's a reflection. Acts chapter 12, you've got a 1 and a worm in the shape of a 2. What happens with worms in chapter 12? Yeah, Herod. Herod was consumed or eaten by worms, right? He stands before the people. They say, this is not the voice of man, this is the voice of God, right? And they say, and he accepts that praise from them, and God strikes him dead. He's consumed by worms, right? Acts chapter 12. Acts chapter 13, you've got the 1 at the hull of the ship. You got the 3 that looks like a wave. What happens in Acts chapter 13? Somebody's sent out, right? Barnabas and Saul go on the first missionary journey, right? In Acts chapter 13. Barnabas and Saul go on the first missionary journey. All right? 7 times 2 equals 14. 7 times 2 equals 14. Anybody have any idea on that one? I am trying to remember myself on Acts chapter 14, to be honest with you. What's that had to do with? Chandler, do you remember what we said on Acts chapter 14? How we remembered that one? You might be on to something, Arnold, but I have to go back. Give me a minute and I'll come to it. Let's go to 15. 15, what happened in 15? Here comes Laney could tell us probably if she gets in here and gets a thought on it. Laney, your job is to figure out what our mnemonic was on chapter 14. 7 times 2. Acts chapter 15 is easy to remember. You got 15 people. Now this is the Sanhedrin, the council, 15 Sanhedrin men. It's not necessarily 15 in the chapter, but chapter 15. What is the debate before the Sanhedrin involving Christians and Gentiles? Gentile Christians. What was the debate? Should they be what? Yeah, should they be circumcised? And what things do these new Gentile converts? We are Jewish Christians now. Do we adhere to the Old Testament law of being circumcised? What can they eat? What can they do? And they say, no, they do not have to be circumcised, but tell them this. And they need to abstain from meats offered to idols, things strangled, and blood. And then also how they live before God. Acts chapter 16, you have a 1 and a 6 there. Somebody is in prison. Paul and Silas are in prison. Do we know where they're in prison? Yep. Philippian jailer in Acts chapter 16. 17, Paul is in another area, and they've got the one of the 7 built into an altar, and written on that altar is the unknown God. Athens, yeah. Paul is at Athens, and he finds an altar that is given to the unknown God. And then 18, you have a 1 and an apple core. Paul is at Corinth. Paul is at Corinth. Acts chapter 19, 1 and a backwards 9 makes a riot. There is a riot where? At Ephesus, yep. A riot at Ephesus. They cry out for the space of 3 hours. Great is Diana. Great is the goddess Diana, right? Acts chapter 20, you have the 2 and the communion tray. What is instituted in Acts chapter 20? The Lord's Supper, Acts 20, verse 7 through 12. Acts chapter 21, the 2 is wrapping around the 1. What is prophesied in Acts chapter 21? Paul is going to be what? Arrested. Okay. Acts chapter 22 is a reflection of what? Paul is arrested and he's taken and he is defending his case. And what does he tell in 22? What happened in what chapter? Paul retells the story of his conversion, right? What happened to him on the road to Damascus, where he was sent. All right, that's a reflection. Acts chapter 23, a 2 and a 3 on the camel's back. What did happen to Paul in 22 to 23? He is sent to Caesarea. Paul is sent to Caesarea. He may have had to ride on a camel's back. All right, and then the 24, 25, and 26 are easy ones. In 24, Paul is giving his defense before Felix. 25, he gives his defense before Festus. 26, he gives his defense against Agrippa. And then in 27, Paul and his shipwreck. And then And 28, Paul, what happens to Paul in 28? Bit by a serpent, right? A poisonous serpent shakes it off and carries on with his day. All right, we are in Acts chapter 25. Acts chapter 25. Let's read this chapter and answer some questions as we go through here. Eric, do you mind starting off for us? You can read as much as you'd like to in Acts chapter 25.
Now when Festus was come to the province, after 3 days he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and sought him, and he desired favor against him, that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly his visit. Let them therefore, said he, which among you are able, go down with me, and accuse this man, if there be any wickedness in him. And when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about, and laid many grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. While he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar have I offended anything at all. But Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul and said, Wilt thou go up to Jerusalem, and there be judged of these things before me? Then said Paul, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, for I ought to be judged. The Jews have I done no wrong, as thou very well knowest.
For if I be an offender, or if I have committed anything worthy of death, or accused not to die, or if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto him. I appeal unto Caesar. And Festus, when he had conferred with council, answered, Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shalt thou go. For certain days, Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to salute Festus. When they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause to the king, saying, There is a certain man left in bond by Felix, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests, the elders of the Jews, informed me, desired to have judgment against me, against him. To whom I answered, It is not the man of the Romans to deliver any man to die, or that he which is accused have the accuser face to face, and have license to answer for himself concerning the crime that he was in.
Arnold, would you like to read?
Verse 17.
Therefore, when they were come hither without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought forth. Against whom, when the accuser stood up, they brought none accusation of such things as I supposed, but had a certain question against him of their own superstition, and of one Jesus, which was dead, and Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I doubted such manner of questions, I asked him whether he would go to Jerusalem and there be judged of such matters. And when Paul had appealed to be preserved unto the hearing of Augustus, commanded him to be kept, so I might send him to Caesar.
Gentlemen.
Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would also commend myself tomorrow, that thou shalt fear. And on the morrow, when Agrippa was come, and Bernice with great pomp, and was entered into the place of hearing with the chief captains and principal men of the city of Festus, the commandment of Paul was brought forth, and Festus said, King Agrippa, and all the men which are here present with us, ye see this man, about whom all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both at Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I have determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto the Lord. Wherefore I have brought him forth before you, especially before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination I might have somewhat to write, for it seemeth to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not with all to signify the crowns laid against him.
All right, thank you so much. So, if we were to write down, what can I remember from Acts 25? Paul is before who? The start of Festus. Yeah, start of chapter.
Falsely accused.
Falsely accused before Festus. All right, in Acts chapter 24, he's falsely accused before Felix. If you read Acts 24, Felix is the one that says, come back in a more convenient season, and I might become a Christian. Felix enjoyed what Paul had to teach him. Paul reasoned with him on faith, temperance, righteousness. Felix's wife was a Jewess, Drusilla, and so he would keep Paul around. And then, after a space of some time, Felix tried to do something to get in the good grace of the Jews, so he kept him in prison until Festus came to power. All right? So what is a memory verse that we could pull out of this to help us, one, with our knowledge of Acts 25, or a verse that will help us in our study with ourselves and with others? Any ideas on that one? There's not one that kind of just jumps out the page that we memorize, all the time like we would in Acts 2 and verse 38. But one that I think would be a good one to help us memorize what's in Acts 25 is verse 11. Paul says, for if I be an offender, or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me to them. I appeal unto Caesar. So this is where Paul stands his ground. He says, if they have something that I'm worthy of death, I'll die. But if not, I'm going to appeal to Caesar. Because one of the things that we see in all the cases that are brought before Paul, they have no proof of wrongdoing. It's hard, even at this time, to prove that he has done anything wrong. And so they cannot kill him. The Jews or the Romans would not allow them to put him to death without crime. It's crazy to think that a lot of our laws today are based on Roman law. A lot of the stuff that we do still today, that's how tedious they were in making sure that people were not falsely accused. All right. Question number 1. Who took the place of Felix? We've already answered this one. Festus, right? What had Felix done to Paul and why? We had already seen that as well. He had imprisoned him to gain favor with the Jews. All right. Question number 2. What did the chief priests and Jewish leaders want to set up against Paul? Yeah. And this has happened 2 or 3 times now. They had laid wait on Paul and said, hey, go tell the chief captain when Paul was arrested in Jerusalem, and they took him out of that mist. They said, hey, go tell the chief captain, we just want to talk to Paul real quick. And so they said, as he comes down, we'll have how many men? Lady Chandler, Marlon, do y'all remember how many men it was that said that they were going to take an oath? 40 men in Acts chapter 23. 40 men said that they took an oath that they would not eat or drink until Paul was dead, until they had killed Paul. And so they conspired and said, when Paul comes down, we're going to kill him. But Paul's nephew heard this, went and warned the captain. And so this is the third time, in essence, that they have desired to lay in wait and kill Paul. It kind of makes me think what the devil tries to do in our life to kill us, not physically, but spiritually. The devil lies in wait to do things to us, doesn't he? Question number 3, where did Festus tell these men to meet him? Verse number 6-ish. Caesarea. He says, no, I'm not going to take you to Jerusalem. Y'all are going to come to us. All right? How many days did Festus spend in Jerusalem? Verse number 6. 10 days. What kind of influence do you think that may have had on Festus? If Festus is around the Jews, around these Jewish leaders, what kind of influence do you think that might have on his decision making?
He probably joined right in.
In a way, yeah, because if you read throughout the chapter, what does it say? He's trying to do them some good. All right? And that's how people oftentimes work. They become the people that they're around rather than doing what's right. Question number 5. When Paul made his defense, he said he had done nothing wrong against the law or the Jews, or against who? Caesar. Okay, why would he bring in Caesar? Yeah, so Paul was, throughout the book of Acts, the latter parts of the book of Acts, in Acts 22, 23, 24, he's first taken by the Jews. The Jews are going to try to kill him. The Roman soldiers come in, they grab him out of the mist, Paul goes up, they take him away, and now he's in custody of the Romans. And when he's in the Roman, that's against Roman law to beat a man without a trial. And so now he has to stand trial before the Romans, but at the same time, he's standing trial against the Jews. So now he has to bring in Caesar. I've committed nothing wrong against the Jews. I've committed nothing wrong against the law of Moses. And I've committed nothing wrong against Caesar. So he has to bring all accounts before them. Any comments or questions before we move on? What did Festus want to do for the Jews? Verse number 9.
Getting to Jerusalem.
In verse number 9 it says, Festus willing to do the Jews a pleasure, right? Pleasure. And so he says, to do the Jews a pleasure, he says, like Eric said, to get them to Jerusalem. All right? Isn't that how the world oftentimes works against people that are trying to live right? They're going to do everything they can to try to get it to where that person will be falling victim to their designs. And Paul says, what? I'm not going to go. That was the second question there, to what was he trying to get Paul to agree to go to Jerusalem, as Eric said. To whom did Paul appeal? Caesar. What was God's design behind all of this? If you go back to Acts chapter, I'm probably going to get into some of my sermon today. If you go back to Acts chapter 9, in verse number 16, 15 and 16. In Acts chapter 9, we have the conversion of Saul. And the Lord speaks to Ananias, and he says to Ananias, go thy way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me to bear my name before the Gentiles, and kings, and children of Israel. And then verse 16, for I'll show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. So in Acts chapter 9, this is several years before Acts chapter 25, what is the design that God has put in place here for Paul? Confirm the word to the Gentiles, to the Jews, to kings, to Caesar. This is all part of God's plan coming to fruition throughout Paul's life. Number 8, with whom did Festus discuss Paul's case? This gets into the second half of the chapter. Verse 13.
Council.
The council, specifically who? Verse 13. Agrippa. He begins to talk to Agrippa. Agrippa is on his way, and so he sends correspondence to Agrippa. Why was Agrippa in actually no, Eric was right, the council, I got ahead of myself. The council, that Jewish council answered, and so why was the council, or why was he in Caesarea? Hang on just a second. What did you say, Kyle?
Salute Festus.
Yeah. Well, King Agrippa, verse 13, certain days King Agrippa and Bernice came into Caesarea to salute Festus. Yep, you're absolutely right. Yep, King Agrippa. So I was right. I got tied up in my head there, which is not uncommon for me. All right, so Agrippa was there to salute Festus. And then, question number 9, who did Festus say Paul claimed was alive? Who did Paul claim was alive? Jesus. Yep. He claimed that Jesus was alive. What did the Jews claim? Jesus was dead. Paul claimed that he was alive. So there is the argument that is still going on for the Jews. The Messiah has not arrived. Paul claimed that, and they disagreed and tried to kill him. Why did Festus say he asked Paul to stand trial in Jerusalem? Verse 16. Or verse 20.
Faces accusers.
Yeah, faces accusers, and then verse 20, and because I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked him whether he would go to Jerusalem and there be judge of these matters. When Paul had appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till he might send him to Caesar. So yeah, the faces accusers, which is what a person's right should be. But you can see that there was some nefarious things on display here between Festus and the Jews. And then the last question that we have, verse 23 says, Agrippa and Bernice came with great blank. Pomp. What is pomp?
Ceremony.
Yeah, great ceremony. When you have a graduation, they play pomp and circumstance, right? March in, march out. These people came in with great pomp. And then as we get into Acts chapter 26, we see Paul is going to give his defense before King Agrippa. All right, any other things that we can pull out of Acts chapter 25? All right, I had to go back there and look back into my book. I knew Acts chapter 14 dealt with something in Acts chapter 7, but I could not remember what it was. What happened in Acts chapter 7? Stephen was stoned. What happened to Paul in Acts chapter 14? Paul was stoned. So 7 times 2 equals 14. That's why it's hard for me to remember. I couldn't remember what happened. We had 2 stonings. One in Acts chapter 7, Paul is stoned. Stephen is stoned in Acts chapter 14. Paul is stoned. And he's cast out of the city and left for dead. All right. Anything at all to add? It is 10:15. I thank y'all so much for being here, study God's Word together. I'd imagine y'all pick up and Psalms chapter 10 next week.